Well, I can definitely say that I am not as OG as these two gentlemen, and I'm excited to be speaking with them about Bitcoin infrastructure, making Bitcoin infrastructure ubiquitous. And these two titans, honestly, are two of the best. Mike, CEO of Galaxy Digital, you're involved in Bitcoin ETFs, mining, research, everything, really, BitGo now. And then Charles, CEO of Paxos, who's building out the infrastructure that's powering some of the most well-known apps like PayPal, like Venmo, like Revolut. So really, really excited to be talking about what's it going to take to actually bring Bitcoin to the billions. The last session was about bringing Bitcoin to the billions, and you two are building out the infrastructure to make that possible. I want to start off with some quick introductions to where is Bitcoin infrastructure now? You know, you two have been building it for so long. Let's just talk about that. Let's start with you, Mike. You know, what's the current status?
The current state. Well, first of all, I want to say thanks for having me. I came in, I spoke on Whale Day, the first day. I was the first speaker, and all I've seen is this energy pick up and pick up. This whole town's on fire. I've been thinking about this. You know, every 4 years or so, we have the Olympics or the World Cup. And it's kind of a good idea that every 4 years you have a celebration like this, because people have worked their tails off to make Bitcoin what it is today, right? From the real OGs that started way before I did, all the way through. And so I do think these events mark a pat on the back, a hug to your competitors. You know, our competitors really aren't competitors. This industry is so young, right? The total market cap of all the crypto is $1.5 trillion, maybe a little more. Bitcoin's less than $1 trillion. When you think of total global net worth, that's 30 basis points, right? Global net worth is about $440 trillion. And so we are literally at the first pitch of the first inning. I know it feels like we've come a long way, and I think it is appropriate that we have a little celebration. And then we go back to work. In 4 more years, we'll come back down here and we'll run it again. But I want to literally stress that you know, there's a ton that's gone on. From what I see, my role, one of my roles in this, has been bringing people into the tent. And, you know, originally it was hard to get into the tent, right? Bitcoin, you have to sell the story, convince someone how it works. It was hard to buy. It's getting easier and easier to access. And with accessibility is going to come more people, right? Already it's the single most widely held asset outside the US dollar. Right, 150 million people own a Bitcoin or a piece of a Bitcoin. Nothing like that has existed before. And so it's pretty cool. It's the first global speculative asset. It's the first global store of wealth that mom and dad, no matter where they are from, Korea, Taiwan, China until recently, can have access to this. And so the last 18 months has really been a wild acceleration of bringing people into the tent, right? The architecture is being built, which is wildly important, but just as important is the narrative, right? The storytelling, the courageous actors. So I think about the hedge fund space, right? It was about 15 months ago, Paul Tudor Jones, one of the most famous hedge fund investors and a good friend of mine, publicly announced he was buying Bitcoin for his fund. So why was that such a big deal? It was a big deal because Paul's a legend. And once he put his name on it, every other hedge fund manager had the pass to say, if I want to make this bet, I can, and my investors are not going to think I'm crazy. I might not make money on it. I might buy at the right price and sell at the wrong price. But Bitcoin as an asset is an okay asset now for hedge funds. That's a huge breakthrough. The same thing has happened in the insurance space, right? Mass Mutual and the New York Life both announced they were buying Bitcoin. So now you're running an insurance company. It's okay to buy Bitcoin. They're buying it as a long duration asset. The same thing happened in the corporate space. You had Jack Dorsey and Michael Saylor and a bunch of others. And so in every one of these buckets of institutional adoption, our institutional investor, participant, you're seeing people lead and say it's okay. My favorite TED Talk was What It Takes to Build a Movement. It has a guy on stage, he's dancing like a maniac on a hill. And everyone's looking at him like, what a weirdo. And then a second guy goes out and starts dancing like a maniac. And by the time the third guy goes out, the whole hill starts dancing. Like, that's what a movement is. And you're seeing that. You have 3 insurance companies, you can guarantee the other 45 are coming behind them. The same thing in each of these buckets. And so we are on this massive wave of adoption. We need institutions, right? For us to go from 30 basis points of net worth to 2, 3, 4, 5%, right, a 10xing of our overall space, you're going to need institutional adoption. And so I'm wildly optimistic that's happening. I would caution that doesn't happen overnight, right? It takes time. But I haven't been more bullish on the space, right? We're hiring people left, right, and center. Galaxy combined with BitGo will be close to 400 people by the end of the year. We were 75, 12 months ago. And so that should give you some sense of the optimism we have. Anyway.
Well, I know some of the folks, Mike, I know some of the folks that you've hired, and they're absolute studs. So I'm really loving what you're building, and it's really exciting. On the flip side, some of the biggest news this year was around companies that are integrating Bitcoin and crypto because of what you're building, Charles. So, I mean, same question to you. Where are we today with Bitcoin infrastructure, and how is Paxos moving that forward?
I think Mike's analogy is right. First pitch of the first out of the first inning. And I know that's hard to believe, but I go back to my own journey with Bitcoin, and I started, it was at 3 or 4 cents, believe it or not, so it was very early days. And I remember it went to $30, and I was like, oh man, I think it's over. And then it went to $120, I was like, oh, I think it's over, and it crashed down. And then it went to $1,200, and it crashed down. And each time I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't sell. And then over time, I began to realize that this was about a lot more than just the price movement. This is about how it's going to change the financial system. And to me, the most exciting part, and why we started Paxos, is to be the infrastructure layer that allows blockchain and allows Bitcoin to re-platform the whole financial system, which is, I think, what will happen. I think you can fast forward 10 years from now, and we've only just begun, because you can think 700 trillion of assets in the world, 440 trillion of net worth. What percentage of that has been put on a blockchain? What percentage does Bitcoin represent of that? Basically, still zero. Still zero. You have $100 billion of dollars that have been tokenized. That's it. Almost nothing has been transformed. And so I think one of the huge shifts that we saw this year is that you've started to go from early adopter to mainstream. And you're starting to see that happen in a really big way. And I think the biggest news was PayPal basically saying that they were going to come into crypto. And I think people were afraid before PayPal, and they were afraid after PayPal. They were afraid to be first, and now they're afraid to be left behind. And I can tell you we see that in our pipeline, where we have this turnkey solution that allows firms to offer crypto and Bitcoin to their customer bases. And it has absolutely exploded. And the price has pulled back a little bit. In the grand scheme of things, it's really not that big. But it certainly has not slowed down anybody wanting to come in. And I think that in 18 months, almost all of humanity will be able to have access to Bitcoin through a digital wallet. That is what I think we'll see. Huge. And I feel confident saying something that sounds grandiose, because I look at our pipeline, I look at all the firms that feel like they need to get in, and it is a real, real shift. And that is going to be so powerful, because think of all the people who are locked out of the financial system globally. Think of all the people that haven't had an ability to participate. You even have it in the United States, and we're a rich country, let alone around the world. This is an unbelievable shift that's happening, and it's going to be, I think, a very profound shift in a good way. And I think it's not easy to see that, because the price is at its high. Well, how much higher can this go? We're just getting started. I really believe that.
You love to hear it, just getting started. Whenever you listen to a podcast or an interview with an institution talking about Bitcoin, there's one theme that always kind of comes up when it comes to actually incorporating and serving Bitcoin to their clients, and that's custody. Custody, custody, custody. Mike, you just acquired one of the oldest and most well-known custody companies in the space, and multi-sig companies. Can you kind of talk about the evolution of custody and how it's turning into something that actually is enabling the bigger players to get into Bitcoin?
Sure. So we are in a deal to buy BitGo, which is the second largest custodian in the world. And originally I thought we wouldn't need custody. Like most other asset classes, where you buy it at Goldman Sachs, you custody at the Bank of New York. or, right? You don't custody where you actually transact. And in crypto, it was the opposite. We heard loud and clear from our clients that they wanted to be able, us to go soup to nuts. Institutions are fearful, right? Most people that work there, it's all downside, no upside for them, right? Hedge funds different, but most broad institutions, if you run a pension fund, you really are, covering your rear. And so it was ironic in lots of ways that having Fidelity come into custody, having ICE, the New York Stock Exchange basically come into custody, psychologically gave institutions an okay to say, hey, this seems more legitimate. Most of the big custodians are wildly safe, doing mostly the identical things. And so it's a bit of a brand game. But it was important that we had those institutional brands. Now crypto's creating our own institutional brands to bring people in, because the psychology of an investor is, I want to make a bet. I want to make money if I'm right and lose money if I'm wrong, but God, I don't want to make a bet and lose money for some reason I'm not thinking about, because someone's stolen my Bitcoin. And I think we've cleared that hurdle. It was a huge hurdle to get institutional adoption, right? The conversation no longer starts with that. It's at the end of the conversation. And so I think monster progress. I keep trying to use this week of celebration to forget about what's going to happen in the next week or the following week and just look back on where we were selling this stuff even 2.5 years ago to how we sell it today. The conversation is so much more sophisticated with the potential new investors. And a lot of things, I got to remember when I first started, you're trying to explain to people the Byzantine, problem, and they're looking at you and you're like, I don't even understand it that well myself. You had to become almost a computer science guy. We're way, way beyond that now. And so we've convinced the world collectively, and you all should give yourself a round of applause, that Bitcoin, at a minimum, is a wonderful alternative to gold. It is a store of wealth that can be used in every country to protect against fiat debasement. In some of these countries, you're losing 15, 25% a year, and so it's almost a human right to protect your wealth if you're living in a hyperinflation type country. In the US and in Europe, I don't think the dollar is going to go to hell in a handbasket tomorrow. But I do think we're going to see a slow depreciation of the dollar and lots of fiat. And so we're seeing institutional investors want to buy something in their portfolio to hedge that. Not because they think the US is going to become Weimar Germany or Zimbabwe or Venezuela, but because the possibility of that happening exists. Because our fiscal irresponsibility and the monetary policy that we continue to run is leading us to a path that might get ugly. Again, it's not the base case that it's going to get ugly, and we should all pray it doesn't. Because as much as we'd make on Bitcoin, it would be a much worse world to live in if confidence broke down on the US yield curve, the US dollar. And so, but that story now is every single portfolio. If you're not long Bitcoin, you're short, right? Once it became an institutional asset class, which it did in the last 5 months, if you're not long, you're short. And that psychology I'm seeing with every conversation we have.
Awesome, fantastic, and of course, very bullish. If you're not long, you're short. I think that's a fact. So Charles, in terms of, bridging into, let's call it legacy institutions, Paxos has been some of the most effective, in actually doing that. Can you talk a little bit about the business development conversations and what's necessary to get into a PayPal? How do you build that trust? How do you provide that custody and that infrastructure?
Yeah, as you can imagine, institutions are very sophisticated, and they're going to expect things that maybe a consumer doesn't. And so you have to really, be able to build a conversation over time. The most powerful thing about Bitcoin, and it's also maybe the thing that needs to be best understood by people, is that no one runs it, anyone can join it. That's unbelievable, right? No one runs it, anyone can join it. And that is not easy for people to get their heads around because they're used to a financial system where someone's running it and not everybody can join it. And so switching that mindset has taken time for people to getting over that hump for institutions, because it's not one person deciding. There's many different types of constituencies in these large companies, but they've gotten there and they believe it. And now it's just about time. And it takes time. They have legacy. They have a weight of history. They have a way of doing things. I think they recognize now that the old infrastructure doesn't need to be it's not your product. That's not what they're selling. They have the end customer. They have the end fund. They have the end institution. They just want a different product, and they need to change. Now, maybe they'll be able to do it, maybe they won't. Maybe new companies will come up and be able to offer it. But I think there's now this increasing understanding that the infrastructure is not our product. The infrastructure is the blockchain. The infrastructure is maybe firms that can offer turnkey solutions. We don't need to own our infrastructure if it's not giving us the right products for our end users. And so that's a big shift. And as you can imagine, that doesn't happen overnight. But you're starting to see it across the board. I can tell you, when I look at our pipeline, it's really a sea change from 9 or 12 months ago. But just as importantly, it is a whole wide range of companies in the US, out of the US, large banks, public companies, broker-dealers, payment companies, fintech firms, technology companies. They're all thinking about this because they're recognizing, and I think this is clearly led by Bitcoin, that you have a new type of asset that people want to be a part of. It creates a community. I mean, just look at everybody here. This is unbelievable, right? And that shift is something that needs to be natively digital. And right now, that's not how the financial system is set up. That's not how people's financial lives are easily able to be managed. And it needs to be different. And so that's where this concept of everyone's going to have a wallet on their phone. And large companies are starting to figure that out. Oh, yes. Is there a difference between a PayPal wallet and a Robinhood wallet and a SoFi wallet and a Square wallet? Ultimately, over time, no, they're all converging. And everything is going to be in that wallet. And how do you think about what that looks like? And it's because of Bitcoin, actually, that it's created that real spearhead into what this future world is.
So, Charles, I actually want to stick with you. Mike mentioned how small Bitcoin is today, and obviously this panel is about making Bitcoin and Bitcoin infrastructure ubiquitous. I guess, where do we need to go to get there, and can Bitcoin scale? I guess, Mike, did you want to jump in?
Again, patience is key. Revolutions don't happen overnight. And so let's just talk about the wealth channels of America, right? The bulk of the wealth in America and in the world is held by 50 to 80-year-olds. 50 to 80-year-olds manage their wealth through financial advisors, right? You call your stockbroker, your FA, they tell you what to do. That's the way it works. It's not going to change overnight, right? We did a partnership with Morgan Stanley to sell a Bitcoin fund. Pretty simple, straight vanilla Bitcoin fund. What was interesting about that is Morgan Stanley put, I think, 4,000 already of their 12,000 FAs through a Bitcoin course. In order to sell it, they had to take a course so they understood it. I've done, 9 teach-ins. I'm begging for less. With their different sales forces. Our team continues to work with them. And, we have a competitor, New York Dig, that's also doing it. And so you're getting all kinds of education. And so think about what just happened. We now have 4,000 new Bitcoin salesmen. They're out there telling the same story that I was telling 5 years ago. I used to feel like it was like me and Dan Moorhead are the only institutional guys when we started. And now there's an army of them. Goldman Sachs is coming down the pipeline with the same thing. JP Morgan is coming down the pipeline with the same thing. PNC Bank. You name it, every financial institution is now going to at least offer a Bitcoin product in their wealth management division. The faster ones are saying, oh, we need to start trading it as well. So we need the infrastructure to actually transact in it. And so these big institutions are going on the same journey in crypto that most of us went down. We're going to start with Bitcoin. We're going to understand it. We're going to look at the rest of the ecosystem. Does it work or not? Does it work for us? And they're going to slowly build their risk tolerance up. But what's important is, how do you get people in the tent? We're going to literally have 25,000 new salesmen with huge amounts of wealth in their account base, telling their customers that you should at least put 2 to 4% of your net worth in crypto. And the bulk of that should be Bitcoin. That's going to be the story that lots of FAs tell their investors. That didn't exist 6 months ago. And it really is just in its infancy now, right? You have one broker-dealer that just started. They don't flip the switch overnight because, like anybody, of that 4,000 salesmen at Morgan Stanley, some are going to dig deeper and really believe it themselves, right? And as they learn more, they're going to become better salesmen. I'm a 10 times better Bitcoin salesman today than I was 10 years ago. The same thing is going to happen. And so you think that's how this virus spreads, right? It spreads through people getting more confident, for people explaining the situation. And that's part of the infrastructure, right? It's not the technical part of the infrastructure, but the code of Bitcoin doesn't give it its value, right? We could fork it and call it Novocoin, and as many purple jackets and tattoos as I could get, it wouldn't have a whole lot of value. What gives it is this social construct that we believe it's got value. It's the narrative. And so we need more and more storytellers. And the optimism is we're getting them.
Fantastic. Thank you. Charles, I guess same question for you. I love the idea of Bitcoin scaling mentally. I think that Bitcoin should be a unit of account in people's heads at some point. But I guess in terms of maybe what you're dealing with on the ground, maybe what are the challenges of going from nothing to building the world infrastructure, financial infrastructure on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, that just doesn't happen overnight because you basically have a whole circulatory system that's been built up, and it's running off of dollars, and it's running off of old infrastructure. And maybe Bitcoin replaces the dollar, maybe not. Maybe it only replaces gold, which, by the way, is still a huge outcome because that would be $10 trillion of market cap or more. So just unbelievable what the upside can potentially be. But to be able to accommodate those types of money flows and the type of change that's needed, it can't happen immediately. There's just production cycles. There's real-world cycles that need to happen, and that's part of why you end up getting some what looks like booms and busts in the ecosystem. Not because the fundamentals have shifted. The fundamentals are only getting better, but sometimes, just like any stock, it can get ahead of itself. And so, on the way to $10 trillion, it's not going to be a straight line. It can't just happen tomorrow, and it takes a whole community of shifting and moving and changing people's mindsets, their understanding of what this can be, the understanding of why it's not just a good idea, but actually a legitimate way of shaping a whole financial system. That is not going to just be immediate. And it is a huge difference from where it was 10 years ago. I think maybe I naively thought that it could take 10 years. I wouldn't be surprised if it takes another 10 years for that to happen. Sometimes these things hit these real phase shift moments, though, and like we just had in the last year. And so you can't really always predict it. That's the one thing I've given up on. I think I know what the price can be. I don't know what the time can be. Of course, if you're a really good investor, you know both of those things. So we'll talk to, and maybe Nova will tell us, when is the price and time? But I think I know what the price is, and it's a lot higher from here, because I think it at least can replace gold. And it's just the patience and also the hard work that is required for that to happen shouldn't be taken lightly.
I think that's a very real answer. We're almost out of time, and I want to give you both a chance at a last word and maybe a final bullish thought for the audience. Charles, let's start with you, and then we'll close out with Mike.
There's nothing like coming out of a pandemic and getting to spend it with all these people who really, I think, have an appreciation for what it means to be part of a community that can change the world. I think there is just an unbelievable possibility here for what Bitcoin can do. It's just getting started. Don't focus on the short-term price. Think about what the long-term impact can be, because it's just enormous.
All right, Mike, your last word, sir.
Yeah, listen, I said it when I started, this is a celebration of a lot of work done, and we should pat ourselves on the back and go right back to working. This Bitcoin revolution really is about spreading the gospel. We're at 140 billion people, 140 million people that own a part of a Bitcoin. right? There are 8 billion people on the planet. And so our job's not done until there's a Bitcoin wallet in every single person on Earth's phone. I thought PayPal, that announcement was the shot heard around the world in banking, because it made a really clear message to all these guys who are like, no, that's not for us, that the world's going to shift from bank accounts to wallets. And we're in that process. And so, you know, it's incumbent on the community to build, right? To build infrastructure, to build knowledge, to build awareness. But there's nothing I see right now that thinks that train's going to get derailed. We've got issues to deal with, right? There's an environmental issue. I think the community's got to deal with it head on, because every industry's got to deal with that issue, right? Doesn't matter what part of the economy you're in, the world wants cleaner energy. And so we're going to have to figure out how the Bitcoin community moves towards cleaner energy. All right, it's an obstacle. By no means is it existential. There's regulatory threats. And in some ways, Bitcoin as digital gold doesn't scare any regulators. They all got it. They like it. We got to give our population wants a chance to diversify. They want a chance to protect against inflation. When we start talking about money, transactions, regulators' eyes turn red. Their veins pop out on their necks. And so I have been a real advocate of keeping Bitcoin, keep it simple, stupid, right? Stay in this lane of digital gold. We got a long way to go. That simple use case is one of the great gifts to humanity. If you live in Venezuela or any country, Nigeria, with a constantly depreciating asset, you've got to have somewhere to store your wealth. And so if all Bitcoin ever achieved was store of value, that use case, it's one of the great innovations of our time. And so, like, that would be my message. Like, we're going to keep it simple, stupid. Going to keep powering away at bringing more adoption, right? The adoption curve is moving up. And be patient. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. All right.